start recording for you guys. So your notes look like this. They've got kind of the cell cycle pie chart. And if you dig in several pages, eventually you get to a page that says Mendelian genetics and chi-square. It's got kind of a data table near the top. So you got to flip in about 4 or 5 pages. It looks like that. You'll say Mendelian genetics and chi-square. All right. So first off, welcome back. If you're a senior, you've only got 1 semester left. Then you're paying like $1,000 a week for this, right? You might not know that, but you are. I think usually college semesters are 13 to 15 weeks. So that means a year of college is like 26 to 30 weeks. And I think A&M's like 26, 27, 28,000. So you're paying about $1,000 a week. Isn't that crazy? No. Right now it's free. So soak it up while you can. Anyway, so if you're a senior, you've got 1 more semester and then you're done. Hopefully you're excited about that. And if you're a junior, you're almost a senior. So there you go. And if you're a sophomore, then you got a ways. So I realize that I'm lucky, I'm the only AP Bio teacher, so my students shifted which classes they were in, but basically I know everybody. So before we get rolling on second semester, do you have any questions? I don't know that you would. Like normally my pre-AP students, for example, I've got a whole bunch of brand new faces, so they have questions about like how does class work, is there extra credit and stuff like that. As far as what second semester looks like compared to first semester, we pretty much finish up the curriculum in about early to mid-April, and then we review everything again in class. And then also after spring break, I've always in the past, I'll have to get like special permission to educate students. But in the past, we always had after school reviews. Like we'd pick Wednesday was the day that students usually settled on. And we would meet after school for like an hour. School got out earlier then, so I don't know if that interferes with like church and stuff now. Back then you could like stay after school, go to a review, and then if you went to like Wednesday church, you could still make it to pretty much any normal church service on a Wednesday. So anyway, my plan is that we'll do the same process. So if you're taking the AP Bio exam, we'll review, basically it'll be Wednesdays after school, starting after spring break until the test. And then we'll also review stuff in class, starting around probably April 15th or something like that. So you end up seeing a lot of topics twice. I teach them differently. I don't like teach one accurately and one inaccurately, but like if I teach cellular respiration in class and then I teach it in a review, I don't use the same problems or the same type of stuff. So I have like different free response and all that. As far as topics that we have for second semester, we've got Mendelian genetics, like Punnett square type stuff that we're currently on. Our next unit is molecular genetics. That's like transcription and translation and turning genes on and turning genes off, stuff like that. Epigenetics, CRISPR, things like that. Like how do we edit genes? And we get to do my 2 favorite labs are in the molecular genetics unit. After that, we've got ecology and evolution slammed together as 1 unit. And then after that, we do body systems. And that's it. So we're in pretty good shape. Any questions about stuff before we get started? Okay. And if you're online, I've got like right here, I've got this little computer in front so that I can see you a little bit easier. Let me go ahead and make you guys take up the whole screen. Gallery view. So I can see you there, but because of that, there's like 2 versions of me. So if you were gonna chat, I'd prefer you to chat to the one that says co-host. So like if you're gonna chat to everybody, then it doesn't matter, I'll see it. But if you were gonna send me something like an answer in private, if you send it to Alan Cotton, the host, that's like over there, and I'm not as good about checking it. But if you send it to Alan Cotton, the co-host, then I'll be seeing it right there. So it'll be like easier for me to notice. So I would say chat with co-host Cotton, not host Cotton. I think that's what it looks like on your end. All right. Real quick, let me kind of show you where we're at on our syllabus and when we have the next lab, test, quiz, all that stuff. So over here, just like always, if you're remote, I do have this on our Google Drive, but we are here for today. So today is the 6th. We'll be looking at breaking Mendel's rules. What are we doing when it's not just dominant and recessive? We know in AP Bio, we learned 8 ways of breaking Mendel's rules. You've learned at least 2 of them, codominance and incomplete dominance, back in 9th grade. We'll refresh those, but you probably know 2, maybe 3 ways of breaking Mendel's rules, and you'll learn a few more in here, and they're actually really cool, like really interesting. And students agree, students like it too. Then we got a couple of classes, the 8th and the 12th, on chi-square and gene linkage. So how many of y'all have actually finished a stats class? And I'll look in the chat as well. Has anybody on the chat actually finished stats? Like you took it, you're a senior now and you took it as a junior or something like that. Okay, and then the next question that you would assume is coming, how many of y'all are in stats now? Got 1, 2, 3. Wow, stats students just sit in the back together. Okay, so basically everybody in the back. What about you guys that are online? Or any of y'all in a stats class now? You can just put Y in the chat for like yes or something. And by the way, if you're on the Zoom, you don't have to. Okay, cool. Thanks. You don't have to. Oh, got a few more. Okay, I got one that took it last year. Oh, you didn't finish. Oh, that's true. Because of COVID, you guys might not have gotten the chi-square. Chi-square is typically one of the last things that you learn in stats. And I talked to Daily on, it's usually one of the last things that she teaches. So you guys, even those of you that said that you took stats last year, you might not have gotten to chi-square. So chi-square is like a pure math concept. Like I've been teaching it for years, so I do an adequate job. But like it's one where even though we're learning it in biology, like a stats teacher like DeLeon would do a better job. She's a math teacher teaching math. I'm a biology teacher teaching math. So I know it well enough to teach it, but I can't apply it to like 50 other stats things because I don't know those 50 other stats things. So we learn what I call kind of the ghetto version of it. There's like a minimum amount that you need to be able to do in biology. And then you can take it like one little step further. That's what you do in stats. And then you can use it for like other stuff. So what I'll do is I'll teach the kind of stats version and the ghetto version. I'll say like, all right, in AP Bio, here's the bare minimum that you need to do. However, those of y'all that are in stats, when you get to this and probably like March or April or whenever De Leon teaches it, then you'll take this extra step, and it's really important to take that extra steps in a stats class. I don't know why, but it is. They all agree that it is. So I'll kind of show you both ways. Chi-square is pretty interesting, but again, it is straight math. So for like 2 days, you will not feel like you're in a bio class. You'll feel like you're in a math class. The reason that it's important is because chi-square is actually super useful in science. Let's say that I was testing one of the many COVID vaccines out there. So we only hear about like 2, maybe 3 of them in the news, but I think there's like 13 or 16 that are currently all in some version of like trials. So there's 13, 14, 15 different possible vaccines out there. We hear about 2 that are currently like available. But so let's say that we say I've got a vaccine and we want to test it. And so what I would do is I would give maybe by the time I get to like phase 2 and phase 3, I'm testing thousands of people. So let's say I get thousands of people. I think it's phase 3 that you're in the thousands. Phase 1 is like 10 people, 6 people, 8 people. You're just making sure that you're not going to like kill a whole group of people. I don't know how they get people to test these. But anyway, so by phase 3, let's say that we're going to test 10,000 people. I'll flip cameras here. Oh, I already did. Let's say we're going to test 10,000 people. So 5,000 will get the placebo. That means we give you a shot, but typically it's like a sodium chloride shot or a saline shot, you could call it. And so you don't know that you're not getting the vaccine. The doctor that gives it to you doesn't know. He just knows that you got vial 712. and somebody else has the secret list and they know that vial 712 was placebo. It's just salt water. And then 5,000 of you get a real vaccine. Again, the doctor giving it to you doesn't know. You're blind. You don't know if you're getting the real one or not. He's blind, so they call it a double-blind experiment. And then we come back and we monitor you. I don't know how long, but maybe they come back a month later and they're like, all right, 1 month later, we're testing everybody who tests positive for COVID. Out of these 5,000 people, you guys go and just live your lives now. Out of these 5,000 people, maybe 30 of them are positive for COVID. Out of these 5,000, maybe 29 of them are positive for COVID. Is the vaccine good? No, like people that didn't get it, 30 of them got sick. Those that took your vaccine, 29 of them got sick. So yeah, less of them, but couldn't that just be due to like random chance? Kind of like if I flip a coin. I don't have a coin, but I do have a box of Bob Ross Happy Little Tree Mints that will represent my coin. This is heads, the side with the afro, and this is tails, the side with the nutrition facts. So I flip a coin, and let's say that I tell you I can flip a coin, and my eyesight's so good that I watch it in the air, and then I catch it, tails up. I bet you a bag of Doritos that I can have it land tails up. I'll do it 100 times. You take the bet. All right, so let's say I do that, and I'm like, I can get it to land tails up more often than heads. And let's say out of 100, I get it to show up tails 51 times, heads 49. Are you impressed? Do you believe me that I can actually see this and that I have coin flipping talent? No, 51 versus 49, that could just be random chance. Okay, obviously, if it shows up tails 100 times and heads 0, I've got a trick. It might be a magic trick, it might be fake, I might be cheating, but like that's not just due to chance. What if it was 99 and 1? 99 tails. You're like, all right, whatever you're doing, it's working. What if it was 98-2? What if it was 97, 96? How many does it take before you owe me a bag of chips? Chi-square will tell you. Chi-square tells you when we say that's good enough. So when we run an experiment, 30 people get sick, we expect 30 people to get sick over here, but only 29. That's not good enough. What if it was 28, 27, 26, 25, 24? Chi-square will identify a number and they'll say, if it's this number or less, we say the vaccine is good. If it's more than that number, we say, no, that's probably just due to random chance. That's the use of chi-square. We'll say, we're pretty certain that when only 2 people get sick versus 30, we're pretty dang certain with this much confidence that, yeah, that vaccine is actually really good. So chi-square gives us a number, so it settles all bets that involve numbers. So chi-square is useful. So we've got breaking Mendel's rules. We'll still have a little bit of Mendel stuff here, and then we'll do chi-square, and then we have a test coming up. Now, one of the things that you'll notice about the test, I'll flip back to that camera for you. One of the things that you'll notice about that test is it does have cell cycle stuff on it. Remember, cell cycle was like what we learned right before we left for winter break. So our next test does have cell cycle, Mendel, and chi-square. So make sure you kind of dust the cobwebs off of cell cycle stuff. That's my phone solicitor tone. I get like 5 of those a day now. So we do have a test coming up on the 14th, which is like the end of next week. So yeah. Any questions about the schedule? All right. You guys good to go and start learning new stuff then? All right. Cool. Okay. So if you've got your notes with you, we're on that part, like I said a second ago, that says Mendelian genetics and chi-square. If you flip to the next page, up at the top, it'll number things 1 through 9. It'll say like types of inheritance, and then it says 1 through 9. So that's what we're going to be working on today. So Mendelian inheritance just says, hey, something's dominant, something's recessive, that's it. But not everything works that way. So let's see what we got. So number one is just regular Mendelian inheritance. And that's the type of genetics, I think I even say it in the notes. This is like the version of genetics that you learned in like 7th grade, or maybe before then, I don't know. I know it's a part of 7th grade curriculum where it's like big B is, brown eyes. Big B, little b is brown eyes because brown is dominant. And little b is blue eyes. So that's like Mendelian inheritance. Not very many genes obey purely Mendelian inheritance. So let me kind of show you what I mean. If we look over here at this, let me drag this picture over. This is one of the last things that scientists are pretty certain is possibly only controlled by a single gene. Eye color, hair color, skin color, all these other things, there's usually multiple genes involved. So do you guys know what that's called? That's not just the dude that's getting more bald as he ages. Like males, of course, we lose our hair. Your hairline kind of moves back. Does anybody know what this is called here? Yeah, widow's peak. So even right now, before you're like losing your hair or whatever, if you're a male, if you pull your hair back, it's either pretty much straight across or it kind of comes to like a little V. That V is called a widow's peak. And widow's peak is dominant. And at the moment, we only know, lights are coming back on, we only know of one gene that causes that. So there's one gene in one spot on a chromosome. So maybe like, whatever, chromosome 7. At this exact location on chromosome 7, that determines whether or not you have a widow's peak. Does it matter at all? No, nobody gives a crap if you have a widow's peak, but that's like the last dominant recessive trait that we're pretty certain that I can even find on the internet. Okay, number 2 and number 3 are codominance and incomplete dominance. I'll go in order. So incomplete dominance was first. These, I talked to Mr. Zamora. Any of y'all have Zamora in like 7th grade or 8th grade science? Okay. So he said that the idea of incomplete dominance and codominance were like kind of introduced in 7th, but that's about it. But you did talk about these in your 9th grade class. So these are also kind of review things. So here's how these 3 work. Let's say I have flowers and I've got big R, big R, big R, little r, and little r, little r. Switch back over for you. So I've got big R, big R, big R, little r, little r, little r. If I'm obeying Mendel's rules, number 1, just regular old Mendel's rules, big R is red. So big R, little r would also be red because red's dominant. And then let's say white is recessive. Okay. So now what I want to figure out is with incomplete dominance and codominance, what does it look like? Well, if I get an allele, that's a version of a gene, like I could have the brown-eyed allele, capital B, or I could have the blue-eyed allele, little b. If I get a dominant allele for red and another allele for red, then I'll be red. So these are all red. If I get an allele that doesn't code for anything, that's white. Doesn't code for anything, that's white. Okay, now, what I want you to figure out, so take a minute. If you're online, give it a shot in the chat. One of these is pink. Which one is pink? Is it incomplete dominance or codominance? So take a minute. You can talk with somebody nearby if you're here in person. Which one will be pink? ID or CD? Incomplete dominance or codominance? And in the chat, you could just put ID or put CD. Which one, if I'm big R, little r, would make a pink flower? Would it be CD? Okay, maybe CD. I'll have you guys vote. So for y'all that are in person. All right, so here's what's coming in. Got some pretty good chat participation. I like that. Thank you. We got a mix. It looks like CD is a little bit ahead of complete. They're about tied. Looks like complete dominance is in the lead. Online, it looks like it's probably 60-40, maybe 2-1, 66%, something like that. So online, they're kind of favoring complete dominant or codominance. Okay, so in person, how many of y'all think that the pink one is incomplete dominance? Raise your hand. All right, how about codominance is pink? All right, incomplete dominance is pink. I swayed you. I think I swayed you. I might not have by telling you that they were 60-40. So it turns out incomplete is pink. Why does that make sense? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, they're coexisting. They're both dominant. So think back. I might have even told this class. Now, some of you guys were like in third period all along. Some of you guys used to be in fifth period, whatever. So did I have you guys write down like an exact definition of the word dominant? Okay, so this is the only time, I think the only time this entire year that I say write down this definition like word for word. Here's my definition of dominant. Dominant means shows up full strength every time. Dominant. What does dominant mean? What's recessive mean? Dominant means shows up full strength every time. So if brown eyes are dominant, then that means if I'm big B, I have brown eyes. If I'm big B, little b, it still shows up full strength. I'm not like less brown or something like that. Shows up full strength every time. That's what dominant means.
But I have a question because I remember before break, you said there is a certain type of trait that like not everyone has. It's really rare, but it's dominant or like it's.
Yeah, 6 fingers on each hand.
Yeah.
So polydactyl. So the reason we were looking at 6 fingers on each hand, the point that I was trying to make with that, and then I was just trying to make it interesting with like showing you 6-fingered hands, is that dominant doesn't mean most common. Dominant just means it wins out. So for example, I don't have a, yeah, this will work. So like eye color. Let's say this represents melanin, so that's capital B. So I would have dark colored eyes. I'd have dark brown eyes. And so if I have vintage expo there, it's a collector's item to nobody. So let me grab another black pen here. So all dominant means is if I have 2 different versions of a gene, 2 different alleles, the dominant one shows up. So if I get a big B and a big B, then I'll have dark eyes. If I get a big B and a little b, what shows up full strength? I have brown eyes. Now, out in the gene pool of life, though, it could be that like 6 fingers is capital F, it's dominant. That means 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. So 6 is dominant to 5. You're like, well, how can 5 fingers be so much more common? Out there in the gene pool of life, that's how common they are. So imagine this is the gene pool of life. You don't get to pick your genes. You're a product of whatever genes mom gives you and dad gives you, right? You don't get to pick your eye color. Just, well, mom gave me a capital B, dad gave me a lowercase b, so I have brown eyes. So here's the gene pool of life. Let's say that I put in 5,000 blue pens. That represents 5 fingers. I put in 5,000, and I put in only 1 black pen. That represents 6 fingers on each hand. So there's 5,000 blue ones and only 1 black one. And I go around to the class and I'm like, all right, pick 2 pens. What are you going to pick? Like you're just picking blindly. What are you most likely to pick? If there's 5,000 blue ones and only 1 black one, when you pick 2, what are you going to get? 2 blue ones. So how many fingers are you going to have on each hand? 5. Because that's the most common one. However, let's say that you pick 1 black one and 1 blue one. It's a tie, but who wins? The dominant one. The dominant one shows up full strength every time. So if I get a capital F, I'm going to have 6 fingers. It's just your little f, little f, little f, little f, little f, little f. We're all little f, little f, as far as I know. Some of y'all might have been born with 6 and you had it removed. Now would be a good time to fess up. Okay, yeah.
So if like a 6-fingered person, like a 5-fingered person had a kid, the kid would also have a 6.
The kid now has much better odds than you or I would. So the question was, if you were online and couldn't hear it, if a 6-fingered person and a 5-fingered person have a kid, it depends on what the 6-fingered person's genotype is. So remember, a genotype is like, what letters do you have? So let's say the 6-fingered person was this, big F, little f. And so like that's mom, this is dad, the kid's 50-50. So the kid could have 5, or the kid could have 6. He's 50-50. Now, if mom is this, big F, it doesn't matter what dad is, that kid is going to have 6 fingers on each hand. So it all depends. This is the idea of how like 2 brown-eyed people could have a blue-eyed kid. Brown's dominant, I've got brown eyes. Brown's dominant, my wife has brown eyes. But if I'm big B little b and she's big B little b, we could still have, on average, mathematically, about 1 out of 4 kids would have blue eyes. Now, I could have 10 kids and they all have blue eyes, but mathematically, 1 out of 4 are my odds. Does that kind of make sense? So it all depends on what the original 6-fingered parent was. Same thing with certain types of dwarfism. A certain type of dwarfism, it's called like achondrioplastic or something like that. There can be like 20 different reasons that you're a dwarf, and if it's achondrioplastic dwarfism, that's dominant. But if I have, you know, we'll say capital D is dwarf. If I have somebody that's big D, little d, and their spouse is average height, even if their spouse is a dwarf, they can still have a non-dwarf kid. So dwarfism is dominant. In this case, mom's a dwarf, dad's a dwarf, they can still have an average height kid. And that's always odd because eventually the kids are like, 7 or something, and they're like taller than their parents. I think there's a TV show on that or a special or something at some point. Okay. Any other questions about codominance or incomplete dominance? Oh, I never actually told you why the name makes sense.
Well,
Yeah.
what would be the color for codominance?
Yeah. So incomplete dominance is a blending. And the reason that makes sense, the reason that I had you like memorize that exact definition of dominant shows up full strength every time, is the word incomplete dominance would mean now nobody completely shows up full strength every time. So if I have a mixture of a red allele and a white allele and neither one shows up full strength, that's kind of pink. That makes sense in my mind. That's pink. Codominance. Co is like cooperator, together, or both. So now that means both show up full strength. So is that flower going to be red? Is it going to have some red in it? Yes. Is it also going to have some white? Yes, it'll be red and white. Now, some students are like, that's the same as pink. No, it's not. That flag right there is red and white striped. It is not pink. A red and white striped shirt or a red and white polka dot shirt is not the same as a solid pink shirt. So codominance means both show up full strength. So red shows up full strength and white shows up full strength. Have you ever seen like maybe roses and they're red, but then like the edges of the petals are white or something like that? That could be. Now that could be caused by something else, but that would be kind of what it looks like. How can it be red and white? You could have streaks, for example. So like here's a picture of codominance versus incomplete dominance in flowers. Flip it over so you can see it. I've got red. Red is dominant. And I've got white. White's recessive. And if I breed those with each other, when I start getting red and white both showing up, red showing up full strength and white showing up full strength, then that's codominance. If instead I get a blending and it's kind of more of a pink color, then that's incomplete dominance. So if I know the Mr. Cotton definition of dominance, then I can remember this one and this one and this one. Because in May, the likelihood that you flip-flop these is probably pretty good, unless you're like dominant means shows up full strength every time. Oh yeah, so codominance is where they cooperate. They both show up full strength every time. Okay, so these you learned in ninth grade. You might not have learned why it works that way, but everything's been reviewed so far. Okay, now we're going to look at some that might be new. In pre-AP, what we do is, as pre-AP team, we'll say, all right, we do this, 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 and then I tell them, I'm like, hey, here are these 6 others that we study in AP Bio. Pick like 2 of them and teach them, whichever 2 you want. Or if you have time, pick 3. So some of you guys, your pre-AP teacher taught you some of these other ones. It'll just be a random mishmash. So I'm going to kind of skip around, but I'll keep numbering them. So the next one that I want to do is environmental effects. I think environmental effects is number 6. So number 6, environmental effects. Environmental effects is not hard, but it becomes interesting. So environmental effects means exactly what it says. The environment can determine your phenotype. So now all of a sudden, your environment determines whether you're going to be tall or not. So genetically, I might be destined to be 6 feet tall, but because of malnutrition, I max out at 5'8". But it's more than that. If you think about it, let's say that I chugged a 2-liter Coke, right? I don't know if you guys ever watch Elf, if that's like a tradition in your house. There's a scene in the Elf where he like just chugs this 2-liter Coke. And I always think that that movie's dumb, and then every time I watch it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember. This is actually pretty dang funny. So let's say I chug a 2-liter Coke. What's going to happen to my blood sugar shortly after? Yeah, it's going to go way high. So what's the name of the hormone? And you guys in the chat can also put something. You can also unmute and just say, Mr. Cotton, the answer is this. So what's the name of that hormone that helps to lower my blood sugar? Insulin. Okay, so if I chug a 2-liter Coke, don't I suddenly need like massive amounts of insulins to pull the sugar out of my blood and feed it to my cells? Yes. What if I don't drink a 2-liter Coke? Do I need as much insulin? No. So isn't the presence of Coca-Cola turning on genes that make insulin? It is. So based off of what I eat, my body will make more insulin or less insulin. Right? Even diabetics, based off of how many carbs they're eating at lunch, they'll be like, all right, I ate 3 units of carbs. So after lunch, I need to inject like this much, 10 cc's of insulin or 1 cc. I'm not diabetic, so I don't know what like normal measurements are, but like I ate about 3 units of carbs, so I need to give myself about this much insulin, and then I'll check my blood sugar. I ate more carbs, so I need to inject more insulin. So the environment determines whether you turn genes on or off. This actually happens a ton. Okay, so let's look at an example of that, a very cute example of that. The Arctic fox. So that's the Arctic fox. You're like, that's pretty much what I would have pictured. But if I said Arctic fox, I should probably go ahead and flip-flop these so you see this one first. This is an Arctic fox. Also, what's surprising about that Arctic fox? Yeah, when you say Arctic, I'm picturing that everything has like polar bear colored fur, like basically white. So why is it, and humor me, I know this is a very easy question, but why is it useful for him to have white fur in this picture? Yeah, he blends in with the environment. So if he's being hunted, he might be able to like hide a little bit easier. If he's stalking some prey, he might be able to sneak up on it easier because they might not see him as well. Have y'all ever seen Arctic foxes like hunting in the snow?
So cute.
They like hop up and they like face plant down into the snow to like break through the snow to like try to get this stuff. I don't know what they hunt. I don't know if they're, mainly carnivorous or herbivores or just sort of whatever's available. They'll eat meat if they can. But it's funny. They basically go like this and kind of like rear up and then just like dive and shove their face in the snow. Okay, well, this is great. So while it's snowy, you'd like to have white fur. But then what happens when the snow melts? If you had white fur, wouldn't you stand out? So whenever it's warm, they have dark fur. So if they're born when it's warm, they'll have dark fur. Then the winter comes, their fur turns white. Then the summer comes, turns back to brown, white, brown, like that. What's determining whether or not their fur changes color? If you had to guess, there's a few really logical answers. There's only one that's right, but there's like several really logical answers. What's making their fur switch from white to brown and white to brown? Yeah, temperature. So you might be like, maybe there's some sort of light sensing particle, like plants have it in photosynthesis, we have it in our eyes. So maybe there's some sort of protein that senses the light, and like winter has like shorter days and stuff. That would be logical, but it turns out it's body heat. So whenever the temperature drops below a certain amount, then we quit putting brown pigment in their fur. But genetically, he is a brown fox. If we looked at his genotype, he might be Big B, Big B, which means brown fur. But those genes are just off right now. Kind of like genetically, I have dark hair. But what if those genes get turned off? Some of them are getting turned off right now because I'm almost 45. So genetically, I can pull out a gray hair. And genetically, if I tested it, it would say like this dude has dark hair. But this one, those genes are off. So it's gray, which means I am wise. Some people call it old. I just say wise. So the environment can have an impact. Do any of y'all own a Siamese cat? How about the online crew here? Any of you guys own a Siamese cat, or maybe you used to? Okay, how about does anybody have a relative or a close friend like there is a Siamese cat that you've been around? Might not be yours, but you got like a friend with a Siamese cat?
The rescue I work at.
Okay, rescues do? Oh, do you work at a rescue?
Yeah, volunteer.
Oh, cool. Thank you. We got two boxers that were rescued. One was actually at the vet. My wife worked at the front office of the vet, and they brought in this massive boxer. Boxers usually weigh like 60, 70 pounds. This one weighed 105. And he looked like he had like the head of a pit bull. Like he looked like a show dog. But he had like a super thick neck and everything else, but he was lean like a boxer. And he had been fighting, so the people were just like, hey, we're going to put this dog down. And we already had another rescue boxer that didn't get along well with other dogs at home. And my wife couldn't stand to have this dog put down. So she's like, if you'll pay for the shots, I'll take the dog. And she's like, I'm bringing home another dog. And I'm like, well, that's not good. Our dog's aggressive. What do you know about this dog? Well, they were going to put it down because it was fighting with their other dog. And I'm like, son of a. He comes in. He just had like all this street look around him. He had the giant cone, and he had like bandages. He comes walking in like he owns the place, like doo, 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 looking at me like, who are you? But he was really cool. So anyway, sorry, got off track. Okay, so back to Siamese cats, which oddly is on topic. So there's a Siamese cat. All Siamese cats that look like this are actually black. Genetically, they are black cats. So when they're born, they're always pure white. And then as time goes on, their ears and face and paws and everything get black. Any ideas on how that might work? And it gets black like pretty quickly. I don't know that it takes hours, but it's not like 6 months or something like that. But they're all born pure white.
Do their eyes turn black too?
I don't know. I don't know. Are their eyes typically? Do you know?
They're usually like light.
Pretty light. So I'm not sure if their eyes usually stay. It sounds like maybe they stay pretty light. Like this is an older cat. I don't know like how old, but he's not like a brand new little kitten. And his are still blue. So, but again, I'm not real sure how common that is. Any ideas on why they're always born pure white? If I'm looking down like this, I'm looking at the chat. If you want to throw something in the chat.
Well, 'cause the genes are turned on.
Yeah, so you're like, all right, some genes must be getting turned on or off. What's turning those genes on or off? But you're right. I know that genetically they're black, but apparently those genes are off when they're born. They get turned on right here. It's basically the opposite of the Arctic fox. Where's the Where's the cat going to be coldest on his body? Where are you coldest on your body? Or which part of your body gets cold first when you go outside? Yeah, your extremities, your ears, because there's not much surface area, right? For the for the cold to penetrate my entire ear, it's got to go through like a few millimeters. For the cold to penetrate down into my gut, it's got to go like this distance. So it's temperature. With them, it's 37 degrees Celsius, which is our body temperature. So any place that's 37 or above, they have white fur. If it's colder than that, it's dark. So why are they pure white when they're born? Like the second they're born, they're pure white. Yeah, they're still warm. Inside a mom, your ears are totally warm. You're inside a mom, so you're warm everywhere. And then once you're outside of mom, your ears start cooling off, your paws and everything else. Supposedly, I've never owned a Siamese cat, but supposedly, as Siamese cats age, the black encroaches on the white. So it moves down from the ears, up from the paws, because circulation gets worse as you get older. And so now they basically have colder extremities. And people that have owned Siamese cats say, yes, this is true. You can look at my cat, and if you lined up pictures when they were 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, you can see the black slowly moving up their legs and slowly overtaking their face more. So that's kind of cool. I didn't know that it would be that significant, but it is. So environmental effects. Who'd have thought? Okay, the next one. Any questions about environmental effects? Now, this is the easy version of environmental effects. The more complex version that we get into next unit is super interesting. That's epigenetics. And that's where we start getting into like your metabolism, your life expectancy is partly dependent on like what your grandfather ate when he was age 15. So now there's like environment of your ancestors turning your genes on and off. So one of the things that you learn in ninth grade that's kind of, it wasn't a lie, it's just incomplete, is we told you in ninth grade that all you pass on to your future offspring is DNA, right? If I got a cut on my arm when I'm 12, and then I have a son when I'm 25, he's not born with a cut on his arm because I don't pass my skin cells on to him, I only pass on DNA. And my DNA codes for like non-cuts. Otherwise, you'd have all the cuts of all of your ancestors, right? All the tattoos of all of your ancestors would still be there. So we've always told you all you pass on is DNA. That's actually not true. So what you do right now actually changes which genes are on and off, and you pass on your DNA to your future kids, you actually also pass on the on-off switches. So like you drinking now turns various genes on and off, and they can stay in that on and off position and get passed on to your kids and make your kids more likely to become an alcoholic. And we have scientific evidence of this. This is not fringe science. This is like widely accepted science. Epigenetics. So epigenetics is how the environment impacts your genes. We can predict, based off of how mothers treat baby offspring, we can predict how their grandchildren will behave in certain situations with high accuracy. So here's grandma, here's how she treated mom. Because of that, the great-great-grandkids will behave a certain way. It's super weird. So this gets way more complicated and way more interesting in a future unit. The next one that we'll do, let's do number 5, pleiotropy. So I'll switch back to the whiteboard screen for a moment. Pleiotropy. I remember when they started understanding, like epigenetics has been around for a long time, but when they really started to like discover and learn a lot about epigenetics, that's probably the most fascinating science break. That's the most fascinating science breakthrough in my lifetime. Like as a science teacher, the most interesting, like what the hell, I never expected that thing that I've experienced is epigenetics for sure. So we hit epigenetics again in the very next unit. Pleiotropy. Pleiotropy is my favorite way of breaking Mendel's rules. Let's see if it's your favorite way of breaking Mendel's rules. It's a good way to like start off a conversation. You're in an elevator and you're like, sup? And they're like, sup? And you're like, What's your favorite way of breaking Mendel's rules? Mine's pleiotropy. You should try it. But I never actually do this stuff. I know you're like, I wonder if he actually does this to be funny. I don't, because it's sad. So pleiotropy. I've got a gene, and pleiotropy says one gene doesn't always code for one phenotype. So real quick, let me go back and kind of give you a rundown of some of the science vocab from like ninth grade. We have things like genotype and phenotype and allele and trait and stuff like that. So I might have something like eye color. Eye color is not this simple, but at the moment we're going to pretend that eye color is as simple as big B is brown, little b is blue, and that's all there is, and brown's dominant. So I can have a genotype. It's like big B, or it could be big B, or little b. These are examples of genotypes. What was a phenotype again? Yeah, the physical characteristics are what you see. So as teachers, we always say the physical characteristics is phenotype, starts with a PH, and so does the word physical. So a phenotype would be like brown, brown, blue. You're like, all right, I kind of remember that from ninth grade. I needed the refresher, but I don't need to write it down. I got it locked away. A word that a lot of students do get mixed up, though, is allele. That's an allele. One of the letters, one of the versions of a trait. So when you look at eye color, there's more than one possibility. There's brown, there's blue. Those different versions of possibilities are called alleles. So the brown version is called an allele. The blue version is called an allele. So big B is an allele. It's the dominant allele. Little b is an allele. It's the recessive allele. When I combine those, I get a genotype. That genotype determines my phenotype. Okay. So in pleiotropy, I'll give you a second. Several of y'all are writing. Gives me a chance to get a drink of water. All right. So in pleiotropy is the idea that one gene can code for more than one phenotype. We always talk about it like, oh, big B, that means you have brown eyes. But maybe it also tells us something about your kidneys. Pleiotropy is super interesting. I'll show you why. It's interesting for multiple reasons. But now I could have one gene that codes for like 3 different phenotypes, like phenotype number 1, pheno number 2, phenotype, pheno number 3, phenotype number 3. Now, sometimes pleiotropy is like a cheat. They'll be like, oh, here's an example of pleiotropy. Brown hair, brown eyes, brown skin. Those are 3 different phenotypes, but they're all caused by one gene. You're like, well, that's cheating, though. That's melanin. Melanin is what makes my hair dark, my eyes dark, and my skin dark. So it's just sort of like, yeah, if I have a dark colored paint and I put it here and here and here, then that's one gene, but that's still cheating. Like, that's expected. However, it's not always like that. Sometimes it's more interesting than that. Do any of y'all own? I know it's like all of a sudden I feel like I'm obsessed with cats, but cats are genetic freaks. So does anybody own a pure white cat? Or you've been around a pure white cat quite a bit. Do you get many of those at the shelter, pure white? Okay. How about online? This one's super important if you do. Does anybody own a pure white cat, or you know somebody well enough to where you've been around a white cat quite a bit? Maybe it's your aunt or your friend next door has a white cat and you've spent 40 hours at your friend's house over your lifetime. A pure white cat. I'm hoping that chat will light up. Okay. Been around one. Okay, so I have one student that says I've been around one. So we'll have to see if she knows this cat well enough. So thanks for volunteering. Um, so do you happen to remember if the cat had blue eyes? Again, this might come down to like, oh yeah, I'm not around the cat that much. Did it have blue eyes? You might be like IDK, I don't know. Oh, they do. All right, cool. So you have a white cat with blue eyes. So my next question, is it deaf? It's a white cat with blue eyes. Is it deaf? Okay, that one can hear. All right, I was wrong. Thank you, though. So it turns out 40% of cats with white fur and blue eyes are deaf. Now, white fur and blue eyes, that seems to matter. I mean, that makes sense. No pigment in my eyes, they're blue. No pigment in my fur, it's white. But you wouldn't expect that to affect my hearing. But it's because of pleiotropy. It turns out that one gene doesn't always just code for one trait. This is important because this explains something that's kind of a puzzle. The human genome, the set of instructions for building a normal human, is only about 20 to 21,000 genes. There's only 20 to 21,000 lines of code for making a human. I don't know like exactly which games or whatever, but I know my son plays a few games that take up like 40 gigabytes. I don't even know how many lines of code that is for some game. So like Rainbow Six Siege or whatever, like I don't know how many lines of code that is, but I bet it's more than 20,000. So to run this freaking computer game on a screen requires more lines of code than it does to make a human, right? I can go and like kick that computer and it doesn't repair itself. But if you like cut me, I repair myself. But I only require 20,000 lines of code. How is that possible? Some of those genes are used in multiple ways. So let me show you what I mean. If I've got a white cat with blue eyes, 40% of the time it's deaf, like I was saying before. The reason for that is there's a gene that controls their eye color. It also controls their fur color, but it's also actually utilized in the membrane that helps you to hear. So cats are supposed to have dark hair, dark fur, and they're supposed to be able to hear. But if that gene is mutated, then they would have blue eyes, white fur, and be deaf. Now, they could have blue eyes and white fur for another reason and not be deaf, right? It's kind of like my car doesn't start. That doesn't guarantee that it's the battery. It could be that I'm out of gas, a bad spark plug, whatever. But here are 20 different reasons that a cat could have blue eyes and white fur. If it's reason number 17, they're also deaf. So one gene could code for things that seem to be unrelated: fur color, eye color, and deafness. Now, let's look at this picture of the cat. I'll get it bigger so you guys can see it at home. Look at his eyes. I'm not sure how well this will show up on Zoom. Seems like I can see it on Zoom. Does the cat have two blue eyes? Nope. It's got like a blue eye and then whatever you want to call that, hazel, gold, whatever. It's not blue. So you know what's interesting about this cat? He's only deaf in his left ear because his left eye is blue. Isn't that bizarre? So as his cells were developing, here are cells that end up making your left eye and your left, the membranes in your ear that help you hear. These are the cells that are making your right eye and your right ear. So let's say there's a mutation along the way right here, pow, now your eyes are blue and you're deaf. This one didn't have that mutation. So you have a gold colored eye and you're not deaf. Super weird, isn't it? Here's another example of pleiotropy. What looks different about these two mice? There's two major things, and I know it's an obvious question, but somebody give me one of the things that you notice that's different. And if you're online, you can answer in the chat. You can unmute, participate in some way. Okay, somebody tell me what looks different. Give me one thing. Yeah, the fur color. This one's brown, and this one's whatever you want to call it. In science, they call it agouti. But, you know, reddish orange. It's a redhead. Yeah, the color, good. Thank you for participating online. I appreciate that. What else is different?
Size.
The size. This one is more than 100% bigger. So he more than doubles his weight. We knew that was going to happen. You know why? Because he's a redhead. Agouti mice, redhead mice, are always overweight because of pleiotropy. There's a gene that controls their fur color that also says their appetite is going to be insane. And because of that, there's another one that's caused by them being overweight. He's also diabetic. He's a type 2 diabetic, which is a given. When you outweigh an average sized mouse by more than double, you're probably going to be a type 2 diabetic. So here's what's interesting. By the way, if you're like, but I've got red hair, Mr. Cotton, and my appetite's pretty normal and everything else. Here's the thing. Yes, size. Oh, 3 toes versus 4. Okay, so for those of y'all in person, that one clearly has 4. Is that a 4th one back there that's just kind of hidden? Or does that one only have 3? I had not noticed. It does look like 3 here. Or is that a 4th one in the shadow? Yeah, I think you might not be able to tell online Zoom. That's some pretty good observations, though. 3 toes versus 4. And it does look like in that picture they're trying to display it. But I think he actually does have 4. I think I can see a 4th one in the shadows there, and the in-person students agree with me. And I think that looks a little bit thick, so there might actually be a 4th there. That's a very good eye, though. Nobody has ever noticed that. It does look like 3 versus 4. So the interesting thing is, this is a mouse. What does mice DNA, what does the DNA from a mouse have to do with humans? Well, we're 85 to 90% mouse. So is it possible that like our hair color could be related to our body weight? 90% chance, the answer is yes. Now, turns out that's not the case. It happens to be the 10. So being Irish doesn't mean that you're overweight. It's not that in general, Irish people outweigh the average person by double. So that's not the case, but it could be. So that's why we study mice. Since mice are 85 to 90% genetically identical to us, whatever genes we find in a mouse that does something, that gene's probably in us. If there's a gene that causes a cancer in a mouse, and we can fix it with a drug by Pfizer or whatever, then that drug has a pretty good chance of working in us. Uh-huh. Sure. All right. Okay. So in humans, this is another reason I find this interesting. First of all, I find it interesting that your fur color could determine what your appetite's going to be like. This would be the human equivalent. I don't know what the average human weighs. Maybe the average male is adult male is 170. I don't know. So let's say the average adult male is 170. Then that would mean the bigger human would have to be more than 340. So it's more than double. So the reason this is interesting beyond that fur color predicts your body weight, is that in humans, we've only nailed down a handful of pleiotropic genes. We assume that there have to be thousands of them. Like there got to be, just mathematically, we would expect that there'd be thousands of pleiotropic genes. And we've discovered something like 8 or 6, something like that, like single digits. Last time I looked, I admit it's been like 2 years since I've looked, but 4 years before that, it was like 5. And then 2 years later, it's like 6 or something. So we know of very few pleiotropic genes, but here's why it's important. This is how I'm going to get rich one day. I'm going to have an app. I think it's really hard to make money on apps, but I'm going to have an app, and I'm going to find all the pleiotropic genes. And I'm going to find all the pleiotropic genes that have a phenotype that you can see. And you're going to enter that data into the app. And it'll say stuff like, what's your hair color? What's your eye color? Do you have a widow's peak or not? And I'll even have pictures. Here's a widow's peak. Here's a straight line. Are your earlobes attached or unattached? Are you this tall or this tall? Is your ring finger longer than your index finger, or is your index finger longer than your ring finger? What about your big toe and your second toe? Which one's longer? You'll input all that data, and because of pleiotropy, I'll then barf out a report that says like, hey, you're going to die. Or it'll say something like, you are at a 40% increase for liver disease, or you're at a 40% increase for colon cancer. So even though normally you're a dude you're supposed to get your first colonoscopy at age 50. For you, you should get it at age 40. Or, oh, you're a female. Your odds of breast cancer are 20% less than average. So go team. Wouldn't that be cool? I just find that it's weird that, like, there could be something. I'll put the camera back on me. I just find it weird that there could be something you could see on the outside of me that would tell you, like, how my kidneys are doing or how my liver or lungs are doing. That's just strange. Like, nobody's ever seen. My lungs have been x-rayed because I've had pneumonia. I've never had head trauma, so I've never had my face x-rayed. I've had my jaw x-rayed at the dentist, but I've never had, like, my skull or my brain scanned in any way. So my brain could have 3 lobes for all I know, and nobody would know. Nobody's ever seen my liver. My left knee I've had surgery on that, like an ACL and plica removal. My foot, dropped a squat rack on my bare foot, so that was x-rayed, and somehow I didn't break anything. Like, a squat rack was dropped on my bare foot, and my bare foot was on concrete in the garage, so it wasn't like I was on a cushion, and I didn't break a bone. So anyway, I've only had a few things x-rayed, but my pancreas could be completely bizarre, and no one would know because no one's ever seen it. I find it odd that we could predict what your pancreas looks like by looking at your ears, your eyes, your nose, the shape of your toes or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's just bizarre to me that fur color can predict body weight problems. So, pleiotropy. One day I'll be a moneymaker. I'll sell it for only 99 cents. So that's pleiotropy. The next one that we want to look at. Oh, wait, hang on. Real quick. These are chickens. Probably didn't need to explain that. So chickens, their fur, or I'm sorry, their feathers is kind of like modified fingernails. Even if you kind of look at it, looks like modified nails or scales. Our skin at like a high resolution level just looks like scales, also kind of like a scaly, like a snake or something. So those are modified, and these chickens have normal keratin, but there's a pleiotropic gene that causes them to have abnormal keratin. They're called frizzled chickens, the frizzle mutation. So he's going to be looking right at you. He's turned around like this, I think. He's going to look right at you. And this is a chicken. But he has the frizzled mutation because his feathers look, frizzled. So that's what they named it. I just picture him looking at you like, what? What are you looking at? Frizzled chicken. Now it's pleiotropic, so because of that, I can't remember what it was, but he's more likely to have, this type of cancer or this type of other problem, all by something with the external appearance. But that's just funny as hell if you ask me. Like, I know, like I've got these Bob Ross mints over here, and I look at Bob Ross and I look at the chicken. He's like the Bob. I'd name that chicken Ross or Bob, a frizzled chicken. Okay. The next one that we want to look at, the next way to break Mendel's rules, lights are coming on. Again, Mendel is just regular dominant recessive, but sometimes you have blending of traits, incomplete dominance. Sometimes both traits show up, codominance. Sometimes you might have black fur, but because of the environment, it's off, and it shows up as white fur. Sometimes one gene might code for many different phenotypes. The next one that we want to look at is down at the bottom. Make sure if it's 8 or 9. 8 and 9. We'll do 8 and 9. So 8 was 8 epistasis. No, 8 is polygenic. 9 is epistasis. So polygenic. Polygenic, the name makes sense, but it's not very useful. Huh?
Is there like an explanation as to why, just going back to like the environment, like why some blonde-haired people get darker hair as they get older?
I'm not sure why. The question was, is there an explanation for why people that are blonde tend to get darker hair as they get older? My son was born. He had pretty bright blonde hair, and now his hair is as dark as mine. Was yours blonder when you were younger? Like you have fairly light hair. So let me answer it with one thing on the side and then I'll come back to it. So eyes, one of the last things, like as you're developing inside of Mon, one of the last things to kind of finish in the recipe of making you is to put pigment in your eyes. So it is fairly common for babies to be born with like blue eyes. Genetically, they're a brown-eyed kid, but they're born with blue eyes, but it takes a few months for the body to finish actually installing the melanin in their eyes. So it's not bizarre. If you've ever heard this kid was born with blue eyes and 3 months later they have brown eyes and now they always have brown eyes, that's actually not like super, super rare. As far as hair color, I'm not sure why, but I do know this. Anytime you go through major hormonal changes like puberty or when women stop their cycle, menopause, when they're like 40, 50, whatever, and they don't do their monthly cycle anymore, they can't have kids. Um, Sometimes like hair and hair texture and stuff changes. So sometimes you'll have a mom and she has pretty straight hair. And after puberty, she has straight hair, but then she's like 30 and has a baby, and all of a sudden, ever since she had a baby, now she has like wavy hair or something like that. So anytime there's like insane hormone changes, pregnancy, puberty, stuff like that, hair and texture and color can kind of change. I don't know why though. The general rule is your hair just kind of gets darker over time. I understand that like in the summer it lightens up because the sun kind of bleaches out your hair. Like my hair, if I'm out in the sun enough, will get a little bit lighter in the summer. Just like if I have a just like if I took this and I taped it to the window and I came back a year later, it'd be faded, right? The sun would like bleach out the ink. So the sun bleaches out your hair in the summer, so it might seem to get darker in the winter. Um, but again, I know what you mean. Overall, like you're like, no, my hair was bright blonde when I was born, and now it's like kind of brown. So that's all I got. Good question. I don't have a true answer, but that's pretty much all I know. So very good question though. Um, I don't see anything new in the chat. Okay, so the next two that we want to look at is polygenic. So this means many genes. You're like, yeah, I don't know. That's slightly useful. So polygenic versus epistasis. They're similar but different. Polygenic is like additive. You add things together to make the phenotype stronger. So in polygenic, I have many genes. Like picture I'm baking a cake. And so by default, the frosting is going to be white. But I have some black food coloring. I'm picturing black as like melanin. So the recipe says put in 1 drop of food coloring. There you go. So now my frosting is going to be kind of like gray. But what if it says put in a 2nd drop, a 3rd drop, a 4th drop, a 5th drop? It's just going to get darker and darker and darker. So it's additive. If I had a mutation and I was supposed to put in 5 drops, but I had a mutation on the middle gene, I have 5 genes and they each say put in 1 drop of black food coloring. Then if I put in all 5, my cake will be really dark. If I mutate this guy, it'll be a little bit less dark. Or if instead I mutate this guy, it'll be a little bit less dark. Or if I mutate these 3, then it'll be a lot lighter cake. This is how skin color works. So as far as we know, there are only 3 major genes that control skin color. There's more than that, but there are 3 that control, it's almost like 3 of them control 95% of your skin color type of thing. They might not control all of it, but they control like an overwhelming amount. So skin color is like this. Dominant is dark on all of them. So if you get a dominant, you have the darkest available skin color. If instead one of these was a little bit lighter, like maybe one of those is a little A, now your skin is a little bit lighter. If you get a recessive here, now your skin's a little bit lighter. They have an additive effect. It's now back to my cake analogy. Now we're putting in 4 drops of food coloring or 3 drops or 2 or 1. So every time I add a recessive and I take away a dominant, then I'm kind of making the cake lighter in color. And so that's how skin color works. So if you're a dermatologist, for example, there are 7 skin tones because you could have all 6 dominant, you have the darkest available skin color, 5 of them, 4, 3, 2, 1, or none. So these are the skin tones. Like this is an actual scale. I don't remember the person's name, but it's sort of like there's the Richter scale or whatever for earthquakes. This is the, I think it's Frederick's something scale of skin tones. So if I'm a dermatologist, you walk in, I'm like, you're a 4. Well, if you're a 4, right there, and you live in Texas, then that means when you go outside, you're supposed to wear an SPF of 15 for sunscreen. If you live in Texas and you're a 3 or less, you should be wearing SPF 30 all the time. The likelihood that you get skin cancer if you're a 5 or a 6, even if you don't wear sunscreen, is pretty low. The likelihood that you get skin cancer living in Texas if you're a 0 is almost certain. You're going to get skin cancer. Every time you go out and swim, you might put on sunscreen, but when you're driving, the sun is giving you cancer on your left arm as you drive, if you're the driver, as you drive. Yeah. So we rank you based off of that. If I have none of the dominant traits or one of them, and it's just a sliding scale, it's like a dimmer switch for lighter or darker skin. So that's why, in general, if you have somebody that has really dark skin and they have a child with somebody that has really light skin, normally the kid is somewhere in the middle. Doesn't have to be, though. Watch this. What if I've got somebody that is a number 4? Let's do a number 3. So number 3, they have 1, 2, 3 dominance and 3 recessive. So you're like right in the middle skin tone pretty much. So let's say I have a person that's this. And then I have a spouse that is this. Oops, I never showed you guys the big picture. Hang on. So it looked like this. They basically just had like a sliding scale of like super, super light skin all the way through darker as you go. So now, if I have a parent that's like this and a parent that's like this, that means they're both 3s. So medium, darker skin. They could have a kid that gets a big A from dad and a big A from mom, big B from dad, big B from mom, big C from dad, big C from mom. So this kid could have darker skin than both parents. Could this kid get a little A from mom and a little A from dad? Little, 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 little. Yeah, so every single possible skin combination is fair game in that situation. But mathematically, what are the odds? Well, I got a 50-50 shot of getting a little A. So maybe this time I get a little A. Over here, I have a 50-50 shot of getting a little A. And this time I did. So typically, you're going to be somewhere in the middle just because that's how math works. But you could have somebody marry somebody that's this skin tone, marry somebody with this skin tone, and have any of these. It's pretty interesting. I have a student that is on Zoom, so I haven't seen her in person, but she says that her dad is like completely white, like very, very even light skin for a white person. And her mom is 50%, I can't remember what particular country, but she's 50% African and 50% something else. And she's like, I'm very white. Like, she's like, I'm probably darker than you, Mr. Cotton, but not by much. And then she has like a sister that's quite a bit darker, and she has a brother that's quite a bit darker. I've taught her brother, and so I know that he's quite a bit darker than she is. And it's because the parents are like this. So pretty interesting. That's polygenic. Epistasis is slightly different. Epistasis at first seems to be the same thing, but it's not. Let's see, I won't show you that yet. So epistasis is more like this. Instead of having plus signs in here, it's more like A arrow B. A causes B. B causes C. And that causes my phenotype. Here it's additive. If B is out of the picture, A and C mean I still have pretty dark fur, for example. Here, A causes B, causes C. So B depends on A and C depends on B. So if A drops the ball, nothing. Or if B drops the ball, nothing. Or if C drops the ball, nothing. It's almost like if you've had physics, if you're a senior, you probably took physics last year. It's almost like series circuits and parallel circuits. If I take a light bulb out of a parallel circuit, the other light bulbs still go. If I take one out of a series circuit, the whole line shuts down. Have you ever had like a set of Christmas lights or holiday lights, whatever? You ever had a set of holiday lights, and if one bulb goes out, the whole string goes out? Those were wired in series. That's cheaper. You can wire them in parallel. Now, if one bulb goes out, you just have to replace that. There's just one bulb that doesn't work. So this is kind of like being wired in parallel. Polygenic is if one goes out, the others still work. Epistasis is more like being wired in a series. If one goes out, none of them work. So this explains the colors of Labradors. Okay, so do any of y'all own a Labrador? Or maybe you used to, a Labrador Retriever? Not a Golden Retriever, but a Labrador Retriever? What color is your lab? Chocolate lab? Those are the cutest ones. What about those of y'all online? Do any of y'all have a Labrador Retriever? Black lab, yellow lab, chocolate lab? I have a pair of twin brothers and one of my other AP Bio classes, and they just got a chocolate lab at Christmas, and it's 8 weeks old. It's a chocolate lab with like really light colored eyes. It looks awesome. No lab owners. We have a golden retriever, but they're always, golden. Okay, so here's how labs work. Labs work based off of epistasis. Let me show you a picture real quick. So chocolate labs to me are always the coolest ones, probably just because they're a little bit less common. Yellow labs are pretty common, black labs are pretty common. So there's a black lab, a chocolate lab, and a yellow lab. And at first you might be like, well, maybe this is polygenic, or maybe it's incomplete dominance. But if it was incomplete dominance, a yellow lab is fairly white. This dog is not gray like it's a black lab. So wouldn't the medium color be kind of more grayish or something? It wouldn't really be brown. It'd be more like some version of gray, kind of like a Weimaraner or something, I would think. So it's not really that. So here's how it works. It works based off of epistasis. So that picture actually has a few answers in it. So I'm going to change the picture because I've got a question for you. The way that labs work is this. There we go. When we're looking at lab coat color, this will be the last thing that we look at before we end class. Big B codes for the pigment black. Little b is brown. Those are the only colors. Then you're like, okay, well, that's weird. How do you get a yellow lab then? Well, for the yellow lab, and that's too light. That's better. For the yellow labs, there's a little bit more to it. So everybody gets letter B's, but you also get letter E's. E, a capital E, means deposit pigment. And then letter E is don't deposit pigment. So capital B codes for black color, fur. Little b codes for brown colored, fur. Capital E means deposit that pigment. Little e means don't. So what I want you guys to figure out, I'll give you a minute or so. What do I know for sure about the genotype of a black lab? If there's a dog and it's a black lab, what do I know for sure about it? Let me give you a human example. You look at me and I have brown eyes. So what do you know for sure about my genotype? What you know for sure is I have at least a capital B. That's why I have brown eyes. Brown eyes are dominant. You have no idea what my other allele is. It could be a little b and I'd still have brown eyes. It could be a big B and I'd still have brown eyes. If you have blue eyes, what do I know about your genotype? You have to be this, little b, little b. There's no other option, right? So I'm looking at a black lab. What letter B's do I have? What letter E's do I have? I'm looking at a chocolate lab. What do I know for sure about their B's and their E's? I'm looking at a yellow lab. What do I know for sure about their B's and their E's? So take a moment, see if you can figure it out. I might have question marks, but is there anything that I know for sure about a black lab, a chocolate lab, and a yellow lab? A black lab, well, I know one of the letter B's has to be this, or I know they both have to be this, or here's what I know about the letter E's. So take a minute, see if you can figure it out. If you're online, just because there'd be like so much stuff to write, see if you can tell me what it is for a black lab. We'll just do kind of one at a time for you guys. So for a black lab, what do I know for sure? I'll make sure I can see the other chat also, just in case. I think everybody in person is choosing to solve this solo. Good job, Christine. I agree with that. Let's see. For black lab. Yes, Sydney, I agree with that also. Good. Thank you all for participating. Keep them coming. If you want to, anytime you're answering a question that you don't want to like spoil it for somebody else, you can always do it private. For a black lab, what do I know for sure? For a chocolate lab, what do I know for sure? For a yellow lab, what do I know for sure? And again, if you're online, you can just choose to answer one of them. If you answer one or two correctly, you probably actually know all three. All right, I'll give you maybe 30 more seconds, and then we'll see what we got. All right. So what do we know for sure about black labs? Do we know anything about letter B's? Yeah, it has to have one big B. The other one doesn't matter, so question mark. What about letter E's? Yeah, it has to have at least one big E. I'm currently watching that Tupac Biggie murder thing on Netflix. So every time somebody says Big E, never mind. So, chocolate lab. What do we know about chocolate labs? Yeah, has to be two little B's. Yep. What about the letter E's? Yeah, it has to have one biggie. The other doesn't matter. So this says I have black pigment, and that says I will deposit it. So I will have black fur. This one says little b, I have brown fur, and I will deposit it. What do I know about yellow labs? Yeah, the B's don't matter. Could be little b, could be big B. Doesn't matter what the little B's are. What about the letter E? Two little E's. So two little E's just say we're not putting in any pigment. Doesn't matter if you have black, brown, black, black, brown, brown, whatever. We're not depositing it, so you're going to be a yellow lab. So what that means is one gene is impacting another. I could have little b here and little b here, but that guy turns out to be chocolate, and that guy turns out to be yellow. Make sense? So one gene. So one gene can impact another gene, epistasis. This kind of makes sense because remember, like in the cell cycle unit, where like this protein turns on this protein, turns on this protein, turns on this protein. If anybody sort of drops the ball along the way, does the message make it to the end? No, that's epistasis. One guy impacts the next guy, impacts the next girl. All right. I'll see. Yesterday we didn't have TCTV, but I will check and see if we've got it. Real quick though, first, do I have any questions from y'all on the Zoom? If you don't have questions, you're free to go. But if you have questions, stay on the Zoom. I'll be happy to help you. And I'll be checking the chat too.